never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Hi guys, welcome back to Nev Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Nev. Today is another fantastic day, and it's going to be an amazing day because I have had up till now about 390 guests, and we've talked about anything from to survivors from Holocaust to all the kind of addictions I can think about, everything. But the one thing as men we have never spoken on this show about is actually the porn addiction. And it's going to be a very amazing interview for me, because ultimately I was born 66. In the 80s in Germany, sex was basically everywhere. It was normal to have your playboy, have normal your hustler, and whatever the things were. That was how a young man grows up. And it's just bizarre. So to now come down the line to 2023 and actually shine a light on the impact of porn onto men's masculinity, that will be an interesting journey, probably something that will rattle my cage a bit, but I'm okay with that. Bring it on, because I have got JK Emezi with me. JK is a man who has been himself in the darkness and has found ways, and in fact actually created a system to help men address their addiction to porn. And therefore, I can't wait to talk to him. JK, welcome onto my show.
Stefan, it is my pleasure to be here. And I must say, I'm so surprised that almost 400 episodes in, you haven't spoken to someone about pornography addiction. So I'm honored to be the first person to do this, who takes the virginity of the show when it comes to talking about pornography addiction.
Nice one,
right?
nice one, nice one. I think the reality is maybe it's too close to home. In all fairness, that could very well be. But having said that, I mean, we're living in funny times, and men are supposed to be vulnerable. Men are supposed to be all these kind of, we have all these labels being put upon us and putting them onto us. And sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of men nowadays are completely confused with regards to masculinity. What is a man? Who is a man? What defines a man? And my problem really is, I mean, I was defined by role models when I was younger, which were just shit, really shitty male role models, which taught me that a man defines himself by the amount of women that he can conquer. Those kind of things. That's what a real man does. I want to say masculine toxicity or toxic masculinity, however you look at it. At the same token, it was what it was. These were the 70s and 80s. So therefore, I mean, just that as a preamble, that is where I will be coming from. What was your story? Where did you fall prey? And why do you label yourself with the label of porn addiction?
This is a great question. The first thing I'll address is the label. The truth is that I only use the label because it is something that the general public and men who struggle with this behavior can relate to. Because we come from a culture, thankfully, Western culture, there's at least a culture of helping people with addiction. In a lot of other cultures, it is not addressed. So I have my thoughts on the label of an addict, but we can get into that later. My story is I'm 39 years old, and I first came across pornography when I was about 8 years old. So my parents were in the medical field traveling, and I stayed at home. And we had a family member, like an older cousin, who was a nanny, and she took care of us. Now I was, and this was the early 90s, I was a big comic book fan. I loved comics. And I'd read every comic, any graphic novel, I would grab it. And I saw her reading a comic book, but she wouldn't let me read it. And I didn't understand, why would an adult not let me, a child, read a comic book? I mean, when you're done with it, share the love, right? So I determined that I was going to read that. I've always been a voracious reader, Stefan. So she was staying in a room with us in the house, and I found it under her bed. I was like, why would she even hide this under her bed? So I pull it out and I open it, and it's a pornographic comic, right? It has a whole theme. And the theme of this, Stefan, was a young man gets engaged. It starts off innocent enough, showing the story of a young man growing up, his loving family. His mother passes away and his dad raises him. So he goes off and he gets married, he gets engaged and brings back his beautiful bride-to-be and introduces her to the father. And then he leaves the house when he's introduced her to the father to go run some errand. And suddenly it gets very sexual. And she's having sex with the father in a very graphic way. And I grew up in a conservative Catholic home. So I knew what I was watching was bad and I would get punished. But Stefan, being 8 years old, I didn't have the capacity to be sexually aroused biologically, but I did feel a rush of adrenaline. There was an explosion of chemicals in my brain, just that fear of, I'm going to get caught and they're going to beat the crap out of me. They're going to whoop me. My dad's going to bring the belt. That was, what we would call abuse now. But back in the day, that was just how you got disciplined. And that rush, that fear of being caught, but also the curiosity of, oh, this is the thing they've been hiding from me, all that. Is this what sex is? That was my education on sex. And here's the thing. Even though I couldn't get aroused, right after that, because it was such a unique experience, such a visceral, exciting experience, anytime I got into trouble, anytime I felt lonely, anytime I felt sad, anytime that I felt hurt, and I wanted to change my emotional state, I would look for something with nudity to change that state, to get that rush, that like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. And this continued from 8 years old all the way through about 13, 14, when I learned how to masturbate. And the moment I learned how to masturbate, it seemed that there was now a purpose to those feelings. Oh, there is something pleasurable to this. And the pattern continued, except that when I masturbated, there was shame because I grew up in a Catholic home. And from there onwards, every time a girl rejected me, I didn't feel cool as the other masculine boys. I was I was a late bloomer. So while all the other boys were getting chest hair and getting muscles and everything, I still looked like a kid. I would run to porn. And this continued until I became an adult. So in my early 20s, when I went into college, that was when I discovered it was a problem. Because for me, I did not understand what intimacy was. Women had only one purpose, and that was to satisfy me sexually. That's kind of how I fell into pornography addiction.
Wow. I had never heard it spelled out in such a way, but it actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. What you experienced was an overwhelming wave of neurochemicals and emotion at a very young age. And of course, this would leave such a deep memory scar. And of course, you would always be drawn back to that. Wow. Okay, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. It is interesting. You are from Nigerian background and Malaysian background. Was at that time where were you literally in the world when that occurred?
This was growing up in Nigeria as a child. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is pornography there? What was sex in that sense ubiquitous there, or how was it growing up for you there?
You mean the attitude towards sex?
The attitude, but also, I mean, I certainly, when I remember my childhood or my younger years, Playboy, Hustler, those magazines you could easily buy everywhere. It was just normal. They were not even hidden. They were just next to the comics to be extreme. Is it similar in Nigeria?
Not really. It was
No.
a conservative society. So you didn't see that all over the place, but you
Right.
could go to certain stores
Mm.
and you would see that. You could go to the barber shop, you could see that.
Right. Right.
You know, ultimately, what I found over the years is that the access to it um, doesn't matter that much,
Mm.
because the moments that somebody has an attachment to this behavior, they're going to find a way to be exposed to it. So I'll speak to guys who say, well, like there was Hustler, Playboy, all of this stuff was around me. And I grew up with it, or my dad would leave it lying around in different places. And also speak to guys who were like, I never saw it, but somebody in school would bring a Playboy around, and we would pass it around and take it home and so on. So for the individuals who are predisposed to this, it doesn't really matter culturally how much pornography was around, because Stefan, I'm sure there are people that you grew up with who are also exposed to the same things you were, but perhaps sexually, their life may not have taken the same direction that yours did. Is that fair to say?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. Having said that, I'm trying to distinguish the role of pornography or pornographic material in the bigger scheme of core beliefs and the way I was introduced to women. It struck a chord with me when you said that women for you were there to pleasure you. So it was basically objectification, so to speak, of women. How did that translate into relationships as a teenager? How did it? Forget the pornography for a moment. How did you see yourself as a young growing man inside a relationship?
Yeah, those years were very painful for me, bearing in mind that adolescence is the time when you start forming your sense of identity as a man. You've already built the foundation, the templates from what you've seen about masculinity growing up, from uncles, aunts, the men around you, television, and so on. But adolescence is where it is really beginning to be built up. There's so much uncertainty. There's so many hormones, and the emotions can take you anyway. For me, there was a lot of fear. And one of the things I do with clients when I speak with them is we try to identify a specific emotion they can use to define their adolescence. Mine was fear and frustration, because we can't remember all the details as we get older, but we can certainly remember the emotions, right? Like for you, what would be one emotion that you remember from your adolescence, Stefan?
Hard to say. I was already thinking that the moment you actually said that, you mentioned that word. It's very hard. With hindsight, fear, very much so. But again, at the age of 13, at a very young age, I became the victim of a gang assault. So from then on, I was Rambo. So I was basically post-traumatic stress programmed from the word go. So fear is a negative term. Ready to fight, anxious, high levels of anxiety. I think that would be how I would phrase that.
And then that would probably be the frame of your adolescence.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. I can see how that would happen if you experienced some sort of physical abuse, physical or trauma at a young age when you can't really process it.
But then again, from this case onwards, though, I mean, it's what you're describing to me, though, is that you escaped into your reality with the help of pornography, which is exactly what I did later on with regards to alcohol, and so many of us do with other things. So we can escape for a moment the boredom, the trauma, the pressure, the anxiety, the negative emotions. We can switch it off with whatever is laid down in our memory system at an early age. And in your case, that was pornography.
Absolutely. And in terms of relationships, I think it's fair to say that my relationship was with pornography. When you think of the things that define a relationship, the needs, pornography provided those needs. When I was hurt and I needed to express an emotion like anger or frustration, I would go and find pornography that was violent in nature, something that could make me feel that somebody was being punished for that. When I needed to be comforted, I would go and find a genre like that. So what people may not understand is during those teenage years when people are overly dependent on it. And I want to make it clear, personally, I am not against pornography. It is not a part of my life right now, but it's been around since the beginning of time. And I'm under no illusions. I'm not here as some, like, oh, we're going to stop porn. No, I'm not anti-pornography, but I am anti using it as a crutch in your life and learning that there are better tools and learning that you are the best expert at yourself and learning that within you, there is so much more that you can tap into. Beautiful. Joy and love and connection. I didn't have those things. And pornography became the thing I built a relationship with. When your relationship is with pornography, when you are in the presence of a real woman, well, porn doesn't have intimacy. It is you being a spectator in other people's connection that is not real. It is an act. So when you are in the presence of somebody, how? When you have watched more porn than you've had sex, how can you truly expect to have a healthy sexual experience with a woman or intimacy?
Ooh, very nicely said. Ooh, very good. And of course, you need to then talk about the insecurity that leads you to actually be in this place in the first instance. There is no teenager I've ever met or will ever meet who has not felt out of place, not connected, all those kind of things that nowadays get pigeonholed into anxiety disorder, etc. Well, that is, I think, to a certain degree, a normal response of us trying to understand the world with all the hormones that are rushing through us. Having said all that, the insecurities, of course, then translate also into your communication with the others, with the other or the same sex, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter what your taste is or where you get drawn to. It's the lack of communication that is often so difficult. And you see that again and again. I had many partners due to whatever reasons. And I would say half of the women that I was together with never had an orgasm prior to meeting me, because there was never the communication with their respective partners to actually express their desires, their wishes, their needs, all that. We are very bad in communicating, full stop, period. That's why so many relationships go down the gurgler. We can't actually talk. And that's certainly when it then comes to sex. It's even more difficult because you get the whole taboo kind of thing around it. Yeah. So here you were. May I ask, was there a particular part of porn that was drawing you, or was it was just anything sexual?
That's a good question. It was anything. At that point, due to the limited access that I had, I would use whatever I had. But when I got access to high-speed internet, then I had the opportunity to become a connoisseur of different genres.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just as much as they are
It's like
wine
chef's
connoisseurs.
kiss, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, priceless. Excellent. Were you more drawn to the fringes, or were you more drawn to just a certain type of women?
It escalated all the way. It escalated. I tell clients that if you've done it and experienced shame, I've probably watched it as well, right? And that's the nature of a compulsive behavior with pornography.
Yeah.
Basically, the first thing is to realize that if you have or have had a problem with pornography in this lifetime, then it is a fact that you have viewed more naked people having sex than every single one of your ancestors who existed before you. That is a fact. That is an objective truth.
True.
Which means that you are way past whatever would be considered vanilla pornography. And there's nothing like vanilla pornography, like just missionary position now. Everything starts off like really just at the highest level of intensity right away. And the more you view it, the more you become desensitized to it. And you need increasingly more taboo, more novel types of pornography in order to experience the same level of orgasm. And that continues over and over again. So whatever you would call the fringes, well, the fringes today with pornography are no longer the fringes. They're more like the norm.
Well, yeah.
But whatever the fringes are worse.
50 Shades of Grey, BDSM in the past. Oh my God, these are weirdos.
They would burn the theater down if that was played in the 80s or the 90s.
There you go. And now it's normal. I work in a hospital. Virtually every woman in that hospital has read 50 Shades of Grey. Touche. Okay. So, out of interest, do you think 50 Shades of Grey, a book like that, is that pornography? What is actually pornography?
Well, I have not read the book. I watched the first movie and I laughed through entire. I thought it was a comedy. I don't know what this says about me. I just found it hilarious. And I think the interesting thing is whoever put that movie together tried very, very hard to translate something which is in a woman's imagination onto the big screen. And I think the biggest allure of the book was the fact that women were free to imagine what their version of a billionaire was and to imagine the tension and a creation in their own mind. Even with pornography addiction, it manifests quite differently in women than it does with men. But what is pornography? I would say the definition has changed. The definition I would like to use today is anything, any image. And the reason why I'm saying that it has changed is because if you were to get on social media today with something like Instagram, there are just so many new things with TikTok and all of this, and men get addicted to this and OnlyFans. I would say anything that causes somebody to be sexually aroused without their permission can be considered to be pornography. And a good way to explain this and the negative impact of pornography with this definition would be understand that any image which a person who is illiterate, a person who may not have all their mental faculties, they're not fully mentally developed, and a child can view and understand instinctively what it is and have a reaction to it is pornography. And it is also not consensual. This is very important when we think of what we are exposing children to, because it affects what we call their arousal template, right? But that would be my definition of pornography today. And if you were to ask me 2 years from now, it might change slightly.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a tricky one, isn't it? Just to actually think about it, because our societal norms have changed so much with the increasing I don't know. Something has significantly changed. There was, when I was a younger man, we had amazing parties, and these parties obviously they often ended up in sexual acts, but it was all consensual. It was all beautiful. It was actually just lovely times when young men and women explored their horizons and explored their relationships. So that is what I remember as a, in my early 20s. Nowadays, when I look at my two young sons who are in the early 20s, from a very early age on, people have sent, people as in women, girls have sent them boob pics, more explicit things, dick pics. 80% of their mates have sent dick pics around. This is crazy for me to actually see that. So there is a complete change in societal norm from something that you would never do in the 80s, or even one generation ago, is now the norm. So therefore,
Absolutely.
we need to actually say, well, okay, so if everyone is showing their bits, so hang on, what's then pornography? So the hustler pictures or an actually quite tasteful nude picture, well, is that pornography or is that actually art? So, how do you answer that? What's the difference between tasteful art and pornography?
Absolutely. This is a great question. I actually speaking, I try not to stray into that realm, right? I try to stray, not to stray into that realm. I think there is art. Art does not have the purpose of evoking a purely primal emotion from somebody, like pure arousal, right? If you look at a piece of art and the emotion it brings up is just pure arousal, what is artistic about it?
Okay.
Yeah,
So
what is a more subtle emotion? Right, we're in dangerous territory already trying to define something with art, right? But what is a more subtle emotion that is brought out? You can look at a piece of art that depicts war, and you can look at that piece of art and you can see violence, you can see sadness, you can see heartbreak, you can see many things. But if we look at something that is erotic in nature and it does not contain perhaps beauty, perhaps intimacy, perhaps loss or something, loss of innocence. Yeah, then we could say if it doesn't have any of those things, I think it would be fair to say that it is pornography. So yeah, a dick pic does not depict any of those those things.
Exactly.
When it is sent out, I think when we look at the reality of pornography today, is that it is mostly digital.
Yeah. Okay.
It is easily accessible.
True.
You have the ability to be anonymous while viewing it, because back in the day, you had to get in a bus or in a train, go across town, go to the place where they sell it, hide it, bring it back, and then, move it around your home to make sure people didn't find it. Now anybody can pull up their phone and they can access whatever they want to anonymously, and no one would ever know. Those qualities make it. I think we've moved past the question of what is pornography, right? I think if we start delving into the impact pornography has had on people, how normalized it is, we will see that a lot of the issues that are happening and impacting society have a lot to do with pornography. When we talk about the declining rates in the United States, there are statistics that show that young people are having less and less actual sex, or at least they're reporting less and less sex, which is interesting when you consider the fact that everything in the United States seems to be sexualized. Or you look at a place like Japan, which has a very high pornography use, and they cannot get the young people in Japan to get into relationships, and have sex with each other. It's just no longer part of the culture. All of these things have one thing in common. All these cultural trends have one thing in common. Everybody who was in the statistics watches pornography. Now, one cannot do a study in a high school. They tried to do one. I think it was Philip Zimbardo. I forgot the name of his book, but Philip Zimbardo tried to do a study where they looking for high school students to study them long term to find out the differences in development and attitudes towards the opposite sex and different things in society between those who had watched pornography and those who hadn't. They couldn't find a single
control
person
group,
who didn't watch pornography regularly. So they can't even do that. They can't even create a control group.
And does the same apply for girls? I think yes. I think that has become quite acceptable, isn't it?
Yeah, I think on a lesser scale, when I started my practice, I started this 11 years ago, but it was about 7 years ago that I put my face out there and I stopped doing it anonymously and started talking about this. I started working with female clients, and within the first month of doing so, I stopped because their issues were a lot more complex. For men, it was cut and dry. Cut and dry means I could figure out whether you have a problem with pornography because of unresolved issues, something traumatic, because you were simply using it to deal with stress or strong emotions, or you were using it to medicate loneliness and isolation, a lack of intimacy. With women, it was often due to something more complex. And I think women's sexual templates, I'm generalizing here, is a lot more complex than that of men, right? Their interests, their interest in different genres changes. And it doesn't change because they're tired of one genre. It just changes because their emotional state changes, and at different stages in their life. When they're more curious, when they're young and experimenting sexually, they have lots of tastes. As they get to a certain age where they feel like, oh, well, you know what? I'm done with the partying and I'm looking to settle down. When they're in that phase, their sexual tastes and their taste in pornography genres changes. When they are in a marriage and they feel that it's getting a little bit stale, he's working, he's building, the sex has dropped, I'm not sure about my body, they may have a return to the experimental stage, and anything goes from there depending on how their relationship progresses.
That's a beautiful, beautiful sequence of transitions that you have painted there, and it's very logical, isn't it? But it also we are looking at pornography as something really dirty, as something nasty, as something destructive. Yet at the same token, can it not also be something positive for a woman who is maybe very shy to now start exploring her body and maybe developing a more self-conscious part of herself with the help of pornography? Is that not something good?
I like where you're going with this, Stefan. I think on the contrary, I don't think we're looking at it as something that's bad or dirty. I don't think it's actually something bad or dirty. Isn't that interesting? So it's interesting how there's a natural tendency sometimes to just assume that because we're talking about the negative impact of something, that thing itself, in essence, is bad and dirty. While pornography may no longer, in its current incarnation, be viewed as anything artistic, it doesn't mean that it's not without benefits. So, for instance, with my clients, when they begin working with me, I encourage them, as they deal with their definition of pornography and what it's done to their life, to write a thank you and goodbye letter to pornography, to sort of personify it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it could be, in summary, something that looks like, Thank you, pornography, for being there for me in a time when I was young, alone, and confused about sex. Thank you for satisfying my curiosity about many things. Thank you for showing me where to actually put my penis because the textbooks didn't do it justice. Thank you for showing me that there were all kinds of beautiful people in the world and that I could go out there and have experiences with varied people. Thank you for teaching me all these things. And then it goes into the goodbye letter. But unfortunately, as wonderful as you have been to me, the things you have taught me, the times you've comforted me, the great orgasms I've had with you, you have outstayed your welcome. I am now a man. And instead of actually seeking those things which I was watching, instead of building intimacy and having those amazing experiences, I've started having less and less of them, coming back to you and depending longer and longer and longer. It is time for us to end this relationship. It is time for me to start seeking in the real world that which I am seeking from you. And, that's a way to acknowledge the beauty of pornography and what it has done and move on to something else, or at least moderate the use if somebody doesn't have a deep compulsion to it.
That's a very good point. And I think there are so many arguments. We could go on for hours about the positive and the negative aspects of it. We should not forget that there is, within pornography, there is a very, very dark side. Some people say that a huge percentage of women are forced into pornography or forced to do pornographic acts for reasons whatsoever. That is sort of the one extreme, and no doubt that is occurring. No two ways around it. There's some nasty shit happening there in the sense of sexual violence, sexual abuse, and women's trafficking, those kind of things. No two ways around it. On the flip side, there are women who are finding themselves, who are literally becoming fans only, quotation mark stars, making some money out of it, but also developing their sexuality, taking pride in showing off their body, and maybe even performing sexual acts whilst actually bringing some money home, which can be very empowering. And it sounds stupid, but I actually know women like that who started off making the best out of a worse situation or a bad situation, but who then actually defined themselves and say, well, actually, I'm having fun here and I'm growing here. So it is very, very hard. We're not whitewashing or blackwashing something. It is a very nuanced situation. But I think coming back to where we started off with, the way you are looking at things is more that what the pornography does to the men and how their behavior, their relationship with themselves changes, and how they become maybe less of the ideal being, less of the person that they could be, and more of a escapist, an escape artist, so to speak, from their own life.
Absolutely. I love what you said about the idea of women being empowered by things like this, the dichotomy there. And that is the way of the world, right? And on one hand, like you said, there is sex trafficking that is happening. There are women who are coerced into this. And I have met women too who their lives have been changed financially. They have achieved freedom. Even their self-esteems have been improved through pornographic sex work. Let's just call it what it is with OnlyFans, right? And I actually think it's a good thing that the taboo has been lifted. I don't see it as a bad thing. I actually think that right now what is happening is Fortunately or unfortunately, for a lot of women, it is becoming a rite of passage, right? You know, OnlyFans, and then suddenly all your values kick in, and you're like, this doesn't work for me.
Mm.
But also the reality behind all of this is that, um, you know, for the men, like you said, they have become escapists. Another thing that's happening is a lot of their values are being eroded, right? There's less of an ability to identify the qualities that they want in women because their subconscious mind is constantly bombarded with sexual images.
Mm.
Whether they like it or not, they can give, you know, they can say like, oh, you know, I want this type of woman. This is what I look for in a woman, all these things. It will eventually come down to sex because, on the surface, while that is what you say, your subconscious spends more time in a highly excited state viewing pornography that has different type of women. So it always comes down to that. And some people will always argue, well, that's what it's always been about, sex and so on and so forth. On the other hand, that's the impact it has on men. Not to mention things like porn-induced and erectile dysfunction. And there are a few other issues like porn-induced homosexual obsessive compulsive disorder, where a man has watched so much pornography, if he identifies as a straight man, that he starts watching gay pornography or pornography with transgender individuals, and he becomes confused about his sexuality, right?
Mm.
Now, in reality, sometimes these men may be bisexual,
Mm.
they might be queer, they might be different things, but there are also a lot of men who are neither of those things. And they experience a deep sense of shame because in reality, I sit with men like this, we have conversations, and I ask them simple questions. Would you, if you were on a beach sitting down, a simple question, all right? And when you sit around, do you find yourself looking more at the men's bodies or the women's bodies or both? And when I say this, I mean not looking at a man that has a nice body and saying like, oh, that's a very fit man with a great
Mm.
body. But I mean, are you sexually aroused by those things?
Mm. Mm.
And the men who are struggling with this will say, no, if I do look at a man's body, it is to admire or critique it, but it is not sexual. If I look at a woman's body, it could be to admire it without objectifying her, but there's more of a chance that I will be sexually aroused by it. Like, okay, do you, in your fantasies, when you listen to music and things like that, and do you imagine yourself being on a romantic date with a man walking down the street holding his hands, or is it mostly a woman? They're like, well, it's mostly a woman. But when you watch pornography, do some view pornography and masturbate to images or videos of men? And they say yes. And when we go back in their history, we find to straight porn has led them to that, right? That's just one of the impacts on men.
Suddenly we had the sound cutting out. And you said when we go back in their history, and then we had 5 seconds pause. That was just bizarre.
Yeah.
So
I believe I was. Can you hear me now?
yes, I hear you well. That's fine. So it just came out of the blue that there was no sound.
Okay.
Would you mind? So give it 5 seconds, and then you restart again at that point. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. 5 seconds, and you start.
Okay. And when we go back into history, to the history of men who answer that, we find that it's due to progressive desensitization. They have desensitized themselves because they were watching straight pornography. They eventually watched it to a point that it all seemed the same to them. And the algorithm then showed them something that was gay. And they felt strangely turned on by it. However, that turn on was accompanied by an adrenaline rush because that is taboo. You're not supposed to do it.
Right.
But you are not in a fully conscious state. You are in
Sure.
an altered state when you do that. And for some men who cannot handle it or who already have OCD, this can become very distressing because then they begin to obsessively and compulsively check out people to check if they're gay. I'm checking to see if I'm gay. Am I gay? And this becomes a very big problem. Now, we don't hear much about it because of the shame that's attached to it.
Yeah,
They cannot talk about it. With the women and OnlyFans, what is happening with pornography is that it has made it easy to commercialize relationships. When I don't know how many members OnlyFans has, but I know it's a record-breaking number. There are millions of people on that site who are making money off it or trying to make money off it. Most don't make anything. But what that does is that it creates a generation of men who go straight from pornography to OnlyFans. So they're like, well, I can talk to a woman here. I can pay to get access to her because I don't have to date her or ask her out, but I want to talk to her. So when I go to her Instagram, I'm like, man, she's cute. She's got a nice personality. I saw her TikTok. Let's go to her bio and see if in her biography she has an OnlyFans. Right? In the comments and social media, it's who's the chick? Does she have an OnlyFans? But what's happening on the woman's side, Stefan? On the woman's side, she's being primed to understand that men should pay her for her attention, that men should give her gifts. And how does this impact her relationship in the future? Well, it's already happening because there's a new generation of women who only judge men by their financial capacity. Can you give me money? What can you provide? What kind of man are you? Are you a high value male? And this is with young women. These women are going to get older. They are going to get older. Right now, the value that is put on them by society is their looks, their sexuality, they're young and they're vibrant. And they're being trained to see that the way you make money, there are women out there making $70,000 a month on OnlyFans. 70K, 70,000. There's some who are making 15. There's some who are making 20. The psychological impact is serious. She has not built up any skill set that can be used anywhere else in the world, except if she chooses to be a high-end prostitute. But she now has the confidence that comes with having a lot of money. And there's a new generation of women who are making more money. An 18-year-old girl will start making more money from taking her clothes off, whereas the 18-year-old boy, well, first of all, he never had a chance in most cases, even without OnlyFans.
Very true.
But now it gets much harder.
God. If you think about it, this is amazing. And you could argue all the ways back into the past, because women were always trying to get the most out of it. I mean, I'm in New Zealand here. We've got Jean Batten, a very famous female pilot in the early part of the last century. And she basically married and got into relationships because, this man can finance my next plane, with which I do some heroic things. So let's not be silly here. Women have always used sexuality and have used their body in order to achieve secondary gains or primary gains for that matter. So, and we all do that. Let's not be silly. You draw upon your strengths and make money out of them. So again, there's this, let's not put some kind of moral issue on it. But you're right. What you are saying is not issues of morality. It is issues of a change within society, with expectations with regards to relationships, with moving away maybe from a constructive working together relationship between two humans towards a relationship that is based upon maybe more different values, i.e., in this case, the money. In this case, the immediate satisfaction of coming back to the pornography. I mean, what is your attitude towards masturbation then? What's your? I mean,
That's a good question.
Exactly, because I mean, masturbation is such a beautiful thing in my mind. It is stress relieving. It is actually one way of stopping anxiety that is otherwise ravaging you. So, what is your thoughts there?
I have no problems with masturbation unless, of course, it is done in a compulsive manner.
Mm.
So, masturbation is a perfectly natural thing. And you're right about all the benefits it affords us. We are blessed to have a biochemical system
Mm.
with endogenous opiates where we can release opiates via orgasm that make us feel so much better.
Mm.
However, if an individual is not developing coping strategies outside of masturbation, then they have a tendency to rely on the easy fix, which will affect their sex life, which will make it more difficult for them to sustain an erection, which, when done compulsively, also has an impact on their biochemistry. When we orgasm, we release prolactin, right? Prolactin is makes you lethargic, relaxed. It's released a lot more in women who are nursing, but interestingly enough, it's released in the partners, the male partners of women who are nursing.
Mm.
And what it does is that it keeps the man at home. So he's a little bit more relaxed. He gets the dad bod. He's chill, but nature has made it that way so that he can stay off and not go bang someone else. But men who masturbate compulsively enter a situation called prolactemia, where they release so much prolactin that it is just circulating in their bloodstreams. So that feeling you get after orgasm, where you're just like, oh, I could just take a nap. There are men who live in a constant state of this. And it takes a couple of days for their body to reset, for the prolactin to leave their bloodstream before they're okay. So we now have more and more men who are having fatigue issues. One of the first questions that should be asked is, well, how many times do you masturbate a day? And the individuals were just like, well, I masturbate compulsively. Now, women,
So define
some women will reach out.
compulsively. Define a number here for me.
Wonderful. Well, it's not about a number, right? There are individuals I would masturbate at the height of it 8-9 times a day.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. So you could call
Bloody
me.
hell. Bloody hell. Your penis is sore. Yeah, I see that. But you must be sore, crying out loud. There's only so many.
And that gets into the answer of compulsive.
Yeah.
Despite being sore, despite not being aroused, I would continue to engage in the behavior. Same thing with alcohol and anything. When you keep using and it is having an impact on multiple domains of your life, emotional, mental, spiritual, social, and you want to stop, but despite wanting to stop, you cannot stop. And there's one last part that must be added to it that will make it different from a habit. And it brings up negative emotions, hopelessness and shame because you can't. Then it's compulsive. Doesn't matter how many times. It's just, it has to have that criteria.
Perfect definition. Love it. That makes a lot of sense. Blimey. Wow. Okay. So we talked about the positive sides of masturbation. Absolutely no two ways around it. But there are some positive sides to pornography in its own right. And we've established that. Let's talk about the not so nice things when it comes to society. And we certainly have got most of the data seems to come from the United States, where you have got a very toxic masculinity there. And with that, I would define it in such a way that, for example, the chance that a woman being raped or misused, abused is astronomical, for crying out loud. 1 in 3, 1 in 4, something like that. These are brutal figures. Now, I've never used force in my life on a woman. For me, it's so not understandable. For me, maybe the one good thing in all the bad role modeling was that it is a conquest. It's not taking it. It's not plundering. It is basically a game in which you want to succeed, win.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that was maybe the hunt was so nice for me, and I became quite good in it. Okay, that's cool. Where does that then fit with these figures? Or maybe shall I rephrase that? Is that really an issue of pornography, or is that an issue of society that we're seeing?
I think it's an issue of society, and pornography is just something that adds fuel to that.
Yeah.
Pornography does have a big impact on the attitude that men have towards women. Because think about it, you have high-speed internet pornography, you have multiple genres, you now have any Tom, Dick, and Harry can have access to pornography.
Yeah.
He views it all the time. Eventually, it is quite natural that he feels entitled to sex. And because he has trained himself to view women as objects for his sexual pleasure, and because he does not have any intimacy towards them, he's watching pornography that is no longer vanilla, no longer missionary. It is rough. You go straight to it, especially young men who no longer watch any sort of pornography that involves the seduction process, that is no longer talked about or shown, because we also have this issue of Me Too, where you cannot show men seducing women the way that it used to be done. You cannot show the aggressiveness of, like, let's say the maybe it's over the top, but the old James Bond, right? Those you can't, because that's like, oh no, that's that is crossing the line now. So when you have a society where men do not know how to court or seduce because there's a risk that they will be accused of some form of sexual harassment, and they are exposed to pornography more than they ever were, and they feel entitled to women. And women are also, the dynamics have changed where sex is now transactional, and you have a lot of men who are not making that type of money. You get a lot of angry men. And angry men are still biologically angry men, and they will do the thing that angry, entitled men have always done in history.
Wow.
Societal issue fueled by pornography, but we cannot deny that there is a link.
Wow. Again, beautifully spun together. It makes a hell of a lot of sense the way you describe it like that. And that's even getting worse now, because there is a self-entitlement of a whole generation period, not even to do with just sexuality or gender, etc. But there's this kind of no, of course, I'm worth it. Quotation mark. Oh my goodness. Is there still hope? How the hell can we conquer a billion-dollar industry, a society that is royally fucked? Why the hell are we two sitting here? Are we not preaching to the converted? Do you really think that there is a way out?
Absolutely. I think the way I view it is this. I'm not naive. I care about society in general, but the way that I choose to make an impact is through the individual. Going back to what you said, it is going back to changing one person and lighting the spark within that person. And that person takes the torch and goes to light it to another person who is properly fueled, and on and on and on. And before you know it, slowly the tide starts changing. And I believe in being very hopeful and optimistic, because of the very technology that has brought us here is also the technology that can take us back. Social media still allows individuals like you and I and other people to communicate and reach large groups of people, find their own tribes, and influence. And there are people of influence everywhere. That's the first thing. The second thing is also understanding history. And I'm a big fan of history, and just understanding, and it seems like you are as well, because you understand the cyclical nature of things, right? I'm sure in the 60s and before that, there were different periods where people were also having these conversations, thinking that our society was damned, all our values were being eroded, things were becoming transactional, it's free sex everywhere.
Exactly.
And then it becomes a cycle, right? It comes around again. Society has when you look at history, it has a habit of correcting itself always. There are things that are happening. If we see what happened with the pandemic and so on, that we would never imagine that these things would happen within our lifetimes. You go from Spanish flu to our version of it today. These things are happening. So I remain very hopeful that change is possible. But at the same time, I also truly believe that a person who has gone through an addictive behavior, a compulsive behavior, it is always helpful to be in society, but not off society. So you are a person you're in society, you're functioning with people, but mentally, spiritually, and otherwise, you do not have to take on any of these values, right? Also, to be a person who is giving others space to heal, space to discover that they are experts at themselves, you also have to be able to do what we're doing now. This conversation is important because it further gives us the skill to be able to look at society and create those neural pathways as we have the conversation as to okay, we now have more knowledge. It's like a broader view because of what we have exchanged, and we can see this better, and we are gradually able to help people a little bit more. So this is the work right here, Stefan. That's what I feel. How about you?
Same here. It was a devil's advocate question. It was otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here, because I strongly feel that we actually can make a difference. In actual fact, I see it as my duty, as my reason for living now, to make sense of the darkness where I have been, and show that there is hope, that there is a light, and that it is possible. And it's not just possible, it is actually likely, provided you surround yourself by people who know more about the issues that you are facing than you. So you want to have a power team where you are the dumbest member of the team. So let yourself be guided by a coach, by medical personnel if necessary, by whoever is needing to come into your life to allow you to develop and transform into the new, better version of yourself. And I believe when we do that, when we allow others in, so the power of connection with the right people, and then the power of taking small but measurable steps every single day, every single hour, moment in time, that is delivering us the power of compound interest. So you're making one good decision, which suddenly makes you feel good, and the shame and guilt falls a bit by the wayside, and then you think, oh, okay, that feels good. I'll make another step in the right direction. And you make 5 steps the right direction, and then you stray and you go 2 steps back. Hey, that's life. But
that's the way it's done. I love it.
Exactly. So this path is meandering, but once you actually put your mind to it and stop being this kind of animal on the hamster wheel that just keeps going, and where the external influences and maybe internal influences are left unchecked. Once you actually start taking control, then transformation is not just possible, but highly likely. And it's just a matter of how you harness that energy that is waiting to burst out, that clearly now is bursting out because you're escaping the reality. You're escaping whatever is happening in your life. Let that energy build up and think, well, instead of using pornography, instead of using the alcohol, instead of using mindless sex, okay, what else is there? How else can you grow? Is that really who I want to be? And I think that is, once we start asking these questions and then align ourselves with a new tribe, in this case, for example, bringing you on board as a coach, suddenly you can break through. suddenly all these shackles are just falling off, and where you think, wow, I never thought I could do that. By just being open and by actually listening, shutting up and listening to someone else who has been there, done that, there is a tremendous freedom waiting for people out there. And I think that is the key message that I want to bring out in this show. And that's exactly what you are doing. In fact, you have created a system that helps men. Tell us a bit about that.
The system is called, well, before we even go into that, I just love everything you said because it literally embodies my mission as well.
Huh.
So it's always a wonderful thing to connect with a like-minded soul on this. Like once I was like, okay, the energy is here. Like I feel it. It's flowing out from his being. That's great. No, that was lovely. I run a company called Elevated Recovery, and our flagship program is called the Porn Reboot Program. For those who are watching, there's the little P with the reset button. And the reason that we use the term reboot is very simple. We have a lot of men who come through what we call traditional recovery, which is wonderful and works for so many people and has been so helpful in my freedom from my addictive behavior. At the same time, there are some men who are stuck in this mindset that they must recover that which they lost to their addictive behavior. They must recover the intimacy, the relationships, the man, the ideal. But for some men, there is nothing to recover. Because if they were an addict through their 20s, now that they are in their 40s, their 50s, and trying to free themselves, you're not the same person. That moment has passed. It will never come back. All you have to choose from is what you have here in front of you today. And for some men, I've seen it in 12-step groups, in therapy, they just never seem to be able to break free. And in 12-step groups, I would always be interested in that one guy in the room who was always relapsing, but he had been coming there for 20 years. I was most interested in that guy because I was like, why? Why? Because first of all, I was deeply afraid of becoming him.
Yeah.
And so when I became free from my behavior, I became free, not just because of recovery, but because at one point I decided that I'm not going to try to recover anything. I'm not going to try to recover what my sponsor said I should recover. He tells me, this is an ideal life. You're an addict. So here's what an ideal life is for you. Get married, be a good boy. Don't chase too many crazy dreams. Don't get too colorful because you might relapse. Be very careful, straight and narrow, one day at a time, right? Once an addict, always an addict. And I was like, fuck that. Not fuck that in it doesn't work. It's just like it wasn't going to work for me. So I decided I was going to hit the reset button, hence the term reboot. And I was going to destroy everything completely and begin from the bottom. I would rebuild my self-image because Stefan, and to those of you listening, freedom for some does not come from letting go of the behavior. You can let go of a behavior with the right habits. Wonderful. Then you make those habits a part of your lifestyle. That's great. But that's where a lot of programs stop. Live the lifestyle of somebody in sobriety. Yeah. But there is something else beyond that. And that is your self-image, which is formed by the memory of your traumas, which was formed by so many things that happened to you. And until you change the self-image, what you're doing in therapy with your psychiatrist, working on the parts, sub-personalities, schema, whatever you want to call it, is all about changing the self-image. When you reboot the self-image, however long that takes, everything changes. And that's what we do at our flagship program called Porn Reboot. So we have therapists, psychiatrists, doctors. I myself, I am the head coach and the founder. We've been around for 11 years. And you can just Google us, JK, last name Emezi, and search for Porn Reboots. And as with everything that has to do with freedom from an addictive behavior, I want to make this clear on the podcast. I have a phrase, assume bullshit. What does this mean? It means that when you are seeking freedom from a behavior like this, you are sometimes in a vulnerable state. You are sometimes in a very desperate state. You don't need to rush into anything. Your slips and your relapses will keep happening. It's okay. Like rushing into a program or something today does not mean immediate freedom. It may mean temporary relief. But I encourage everybody to do their research. Pick up a copy of my book. It's called 7 Secrets of Porn-Free Men. I will warn you, it's more of a pamphlet than a book, but it will educate you on my system. Get comfortable with it. I have a YouTube channel called Porn Reboots, and I have a podcast with about just over 500 episodes called the Porn Reboot Podcast. So check it out, learn more about me, and then maybe it's your jam, maybe not.
Beautiful. And guys, look down there into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast, because you get all the links of JK there. JK, you're an amazing man. I feel privileged that you have come onto my show. I truly do. It was such an open and honest discussion we had today. And hopefully with that, we could show others that whilst there is a bit of shame, guilt, taboo, and maybe a lot of it in your life out there, guys, when you're listening, the reality is once you're open about it, once you name it, you can tame it. Once you're actually willing, once you're open to honesty and to actually authenticity, integrity, once you actually take these words and really look them up and sort of think, okay, what's really happening in my life? Once you're willing to do that, and then, as I said, find a group of people that allow you to become a different, maybe better version of yourself, that is where the transformation is waiting to happen. And it's just waiting. It's waiting. And you've got the power to do so.
It's there.
Exactly.
It's there.
So the past does not equal the future. Full stop, period. So do not take anything for granted. Doesn't matter genetic disposition, doesn't matter your past. Right now, you can make changes. JK, you're an amazing man. I can't wait to see who you become in a year's time, in 2 years' time, because you are growing, you are transforming. So who knows? Brilliant. So thank you. Thank you for coming on to this show.
I appreciate you having me, and also want to just compliment you on just your demeanor as a host. I think you are doing an amazing thing, and it's just good to see the different areas you took this conversation. You have an amazing ability to be very flexible, very thoughtful, and very good at exploring certain areas, just pushing a little bit, but you also know where to draw the line. And I noticed that about you, and I love that as a skill. That's something it only comes with years and years of experience, being able to just push it. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Like I pushed it enough. Exactly. So wonderful instincts, a wonderful mission. And I got to pick up a copy of your book for sure, now that I know you have one.
Thank you very much. And whilst I'm there, let me put a plug in. You see behind me, there, Steps to Sobriety. That's the cover of the 2nd edition. As we are recording that, it is August. By the time this interview airs towards the end of September, we are coming close to the release date of my 3rd edition. So it's beautiful, guys. You will check out my social media. You will see some of the things coming through, and we're probably in the pre-sale, in the pre-order time for the new version. So there you go, guys. Brilliant. JK, you're an amazing man. Look after yourself, and you guys out there, look after yourself as well and live with passion. Bye.
Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.